Good morning. Hope everyone is doing well out there. I'm Dr. Nimali Fernando, and we are here this morning to talk about parenting in a pandemic, specifically around food. This is our last session, so we hope that some of you have joined in previous sessions with us. We've had a really fun time talking to you about all the facets of raising a healthy, happy eater, particularly in some very interesting and challenging circumstances brought on by this current pandemic. Today we are going to talk about meal times. So it's going to be a really fun session, our last session. And I'm joined today by our teammates at the Dr. Yum Project, Sarah Moran and Wendy Cannon. And we're all going to be talking about how you can create joyful meal times that are filled with connection, that are filled with conversation, and also where you're happy to and proud to serve some really nutritious, well-balanced, satisfying, budget-friendly, easy meals. And we're going to give you some strategies for that. So I want to first thank the Abu Dhabi Early Childhood Authority for helping us with this fantastic 6-session series. We hope you have enjoyed it. I'm hoping that many of you are here for our repeat viewers and have seen us before. We are really cued into talking about parenting. And so in our last session, we're going to be talking about parenting bravely. And we're going to add a bonus parenting principle today for you as well. So if there are any of you out there that haven't attended our sessions before, we are a nonprofit organization, the Dr. Yum Project, and we're focused on helping families and communities overcome barriers to eating well. And we are coming to you about 50 miles south of DC in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And we have started a cooking curriculum in Virginia that we have over the past 6 years introduced to many, many other communities across the country. And it's called Dr. Yum's Preschool Food Adventure. It's a research-based curriculum, and we have learned a lot of things about parenting and teaching children to eat in the course of our work in schools. And my co-author, Coach Melanie Potok, is a speech language pathologist who specializes in feeding. And she and I, over the years, have shared a lot of information with each other and created this curriculum, and also wrote our book, Raising a Healthy, Happy Eater, where we write about many parenting principles, including the ones that we're going to talk about today. So the parenting strategies that we talk about, there are 7 of them, are really strategies to help families navigate parenting in the kitchen and raising a healthy, happy eater, but also can be applied to parenting in general. And so we like to, wrap these parenting strategies up as we talk about food-related challenges and how to navigate them. So this session, as we talk about meal times, is all about parenting bravely. And having children involves a lot of courage, and it can be hard and it can be scary. So I want to read just a little bit from my book about what parenting bravely really means. So with any new experience, it's natural to feel a bit scared, especially if this is your first child. But we never want fear to be a roadblock to moving forward. Armed with the knowledge of how children learn to eat, you will feel brave. Plus, you'll learn to expect the natural ebb and flow of feeding. So this is really important. We want to arm ourselves with knowledge. Sometimes that knowledge may be a little bit counterintuitive. We're going to talk a little bit about that today in terms of meal times. For example, sometimes your child may want to eat right before meals, and you know that if they fill up on snacks right before dinner time, that they're not probably going to be as hungry for dinner. And so we have to say no. And it's hard to say no when your child says that he's hungry. But if we know that's the right thing to do, and that we want that child to just wait those few more minutes and get that more nutritious meal, then we feel more brave to make that choice, even though it might not feel right in the moment. The other parenting strategy that's our bonus parenting strategy this week is parenting compassionately. And this is really important too, because children don't come with the full set of developmental skills and experiences that we have. And so often they're scared and they may act out, and they may not learn their skills on the timeline that we expect. And that can be frustrating for us. But if we can put ourselves in their shoes and learn to give them that space, that patience, that attention, and that compassion, a lot of times we're giving kids the space to learn with more self-esteem, and they feel good about themselves. So I love this parenting compassionately around meal times too, because meal times are really about connection. And I think compassion is so important when we're connecting with members of our family. So I'm going to turn this over to Wendy and Sarah, and they're going to talk about some strategies, including the feeding schedule, which we've talked about a little bit in the past, but we're going to go back to that, because when it comes to meal times, having a schedule is so important. And I'm going to let them tell you more about that.
Okay, I'm Wendy, and I am a cooking instructor here at the Dr. Yum Kitchen, and I'm also a preschool teacher. And so I know if you have joined us before, you've seen this feeding schedule before, but it is always worth repeating. And what we really want to encourage families to do is to model your day at home exactly the way we would at school, knowing that there are times when you're eating, which would be a feeding time, and there are times when you're growing, which is a time when you're not eating, you're doing other things. You're doing some schoolwork, you're playing outside, you're riding your bike, you're reading a book, you're building with Legos, you're doing other things that are not eating. And so having those intentional breaks between a feeding time and a growing time helps children to understand that there are ways that we can wait until the next time we're going to eat, and it really helps that hunger to develop that Dr. Fernando was just talking about.
Yeah, so having that schedule in place definitely makes a big difference. And we're going to talk more as we go in with some more practical tips and things to keep in mind. But first off, let's talk about why family meals are so important. So if you are thinking about mealtime together, you might think about it and think, this is really about food and eating, and that's kind of it. But really, family meals are about a lot more than just the food that we're eating. It's really a time to connect with your family and your friends and build those relationships. And it's a really important time for the family to come together. So it's really, you want to remember that food, while it's about nutrition, that's not the only thing that's going on there. There's this relationship building, there's culture and food traditions. Food can be a part of our celebrations. And also, at mealtime, kids are also learning some social skills too. They're learning how to have those conversations. They're, those aren't skills that kids innately have. They have to learn them. And also in every culture, the kind of rules of how we have conversations and when you speak and what kind of responses you give. That's all stuff that kids have to learn. So mealtime is also a time when those types of skills are being built as you're having conversations together.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing when we're at school with children. And so some of you may be doing school at home or doing a hybrid, but the same thing happens at school where we sit for snack together. The teachers sit with the children. We model like polite table conversation. We model just a lot of things that kids need help with, like how big a bite to take, how much is too much. You know, talking with your mouth full, all of those things are things that you can reinforce in a loving and compassionate way at mealtime. But those are things that we all need to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So by having those eating times and growing times, it provides predictable, regular opportunities for children to eat. And that hunger develops, and we want children to have that appetite at mealtime. So I think that if you want to talk about cooking together, and then maybe we can talk about the components.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, you know, we're having this family mealtime together. We're having those regular schedules that are predictable, but we also want to remember that really the mealtime can start with the cooking part. So in some previous sessions, if you've been with us, you know, we've talked about how important it is to get children involved in cooking. It helps them develop those cooking skills, but also just their motor skills. But on top of that, it helps them to start to experience the meal before we even sit down to the table. They're getting exposed to all of the different elements of the food, all of the different ingredients that are going to be in that night's meal or that morning's meal. So they get to see everything separately.
And they can taste everything
right.
separately.
They have
too.
a chance to taste things separately. They're touching, they're smelling. They might ask you questions. It also could be a good time to take some practicing bites of food and talk about how those different foods taste. And, you know, they're also seeing how the meal comes together, because especially with some recipes or dishes that we might cook that are mixed with like a soup or a stew or a curry or a stir fry, where you have a lot of ingredients all together. For a kid, that can be a little intimidating to just come to the table and there's all these different things and they don't quite know what's going on.
But if they've had that chance
right.
to help chop all those separate things and see how they look alone, and maybe taste how they look alone, or taste how they see what they taste like raw versus cooked, it provides additional opportunities.
And that might make them more likely to enjoy the meal at mealtime because they've seen all the parts separately and know how it has come together.
And during those preparing food together times, that's another time to engage in conversation, to talk about what food looks like, feels like, tastes like, and that's another time to introduce those nutritional properties and what healthy foods do for our bodies. And talk to your kids about how you feel when you eat certain things versus other things, how it makes you feel. Do you feel energized or do you feel tired? And save those conversations about the nutritional benefits of food for not eating.
Right, not the eating
not the meal time.
Yeah, so it takes the pressure off the mealtime because you can have that education at a separate time. And, you know, it's also a great time for language development as well, because you can talk about describing the different ingredients, colors, shapes, textures, flavors, and you can really start to expand their vocabulary around food and how to describe different foods.
Yeah, because we talk about when we're here in the kitchen doing either cooking camps or classes with kids, a lot of times they'll say, I don't like that. And then if we can help them to find different words, what don't you like about it? Is it maybe a texture thing? Is it a preparation? Is it a flavor?
Is the temperature very hot or very cold?
Right.
Is it very sour or very sweet?
And give those really important food words, bitter, salty,
crunchy, you know, there's all kinds of different ways we can describe food, and you might be surprised. And then once you have that information, it helps clue you in, okay, if my child is saying that they don't like this food because it feels too crunchy in their mouth.
Like a raw carrot, maybe it's just too hard to chew.
Right, so that might let you know, okay, we could try this in another way. that's softer and they may prefer it that way, but also that this is something we need to work on. If crunchy is a thing, we also need to practice those crunchy foods. So it helps give you a little more information to work with as the parent.
Yeah. And if you saw, I think our last session, we talked about making those tasting bites into a real definable cube or so. So if it is that crunchy carrot, that you're making that little cube size and putting it back on the dinosaur teeth and giving it a crunch, and maybe reinforcing those crunches with some sensory input, just to get those practice bites in. And what Sarah said is really important, that if there is something that is bothering your child about a particular food, instead of saying, oh, you don't have to eat raw carrots, we'll always cook them, it's more important to say, oh, raw carrots is one we need to practice so that we can learn to like them.
Because we want kids to have a lot of variety and be comfortable with food in a lot of different forms, so they can be really flexible and confident because they've been exposed to food a lot of different ways.
And when they go out into the world, they go to a restaurant with friends, or they go to a friend's house to eat dinner. If they have not been exposed to practicing maybe even things that are not their favorite, then they're going to have a really hard time having that polite experience with new people, because they won't want to eat what is offered.
Right, and it can create a lot of anxiety as children get older and become eventually adults. If they don't feel comfortable in those different food environments, it can take really times that should be really fun and enjoyable and pleasant, like hanging out with friends or family, or going to a restaurant, and it can make it very stressful for them. And so we also want to be thinking about that long term. We want our kids to grow up to be competent, confident eaters, and so all of that starts right from the beginning.
Exactly. Okay, so I think that Dr. Fernando is going to put up a slide so we can remember the parts of a meal or snack. Yeah, there we go. Great.
So the thing when you're thinking about the parts of the meal or snack, now we did talk about this in a previous session, so this might look familiar to you, but we want to make sure everyone's on the same page. So we have carbs, protein, fat, and fiber. Those are the 4 components. And so when you are planning your meals, you want to think about this, but also remember that any meal or snack can be a family meal or snack. So a lot of times maybe dinner is the big meal for your family, or maybe lunch is the big meal where everyone comes together. But it doesn't have to be whatever the norm is for you. It could be a snack, it could be breakfast, it could be any meal, could become a family meal where we're enjoying food together. And not every single meal you have is going to be everyone sitting down at the table together, but the more we can do it and find those opportunities, then that's going to make the big difference. And so when you're building those meals or snacks, you want to keep in mind having these 4 parts: the carbs, the protein, the fiber, and the fat, because that is what's going to give you a variety of nutrients. So it's good for good nutrition, but it also is going to bring in different flavors and textures, different types of energy, so you overall feel more satisfied at the end of the meal or the snack.
Right. And so in order to make those meal times or snack times special, you can do different things. You could set the table. You could put a candle on the table. That's a really nice way to start a meal, is to set and teach your children how to set the table, how a place setting looks, where the utensils go, where the cup goes. Make sure you have napkins, and we're teaching kids how to use napkins. So set the table, maybe put a candle out. A nice thing to do is put on some background music, maybe music that corresponds with the culture of food you're eating. If you're experiencing a different type of food, try and find some music to really coincide with that. Light music is nice. You can put the lights down a little bit, have that candlelight. And then conversation is really important. And just to reiterate, we're not going to talk about like, eat this, it's good for you, it's going to help you grow. We're talking about conversation that is very different, that is building those bonds of relationship.
And it's a good time to check in with everybody, see how everyone's doing, how was your day, what's going on, talk about you can talk about the food in like a fun way, like talking about the different flavors. And some cultures I think emphasize that more than others, but you know, talking about the experience of the food is also good, but just building those conversation skills and having a really nice, pleasant time together.
And one thing we like to do with when we conduct this class, this 6-series class, when we do it here in our kitchen with parents, it's called Parenting for Wellness. And we have our last session. Not only do the parents come, but they bring the children with them that night. And we have a meal together. And one thing we do is we set the table, the children set the table, and we get some conversation cards. And so you can create your own questions, or you could go online, go to Pinterest and Google conversation cards, search for it, and you'll find some different questions that you can engage in during mealtime. So I'm going to ask Sarah a question while we're having dinner tonight, and I'm going to say, what is the best gift you have ever received?
Oh, the best gift I've ever received. This is a hard one.
That
This
is.
is good. I think maybe one of the best gifts I ever received was there was this event I really wanted to go to, but I didn't think I would be able to go to it. And my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he like really sneakily like got me tickets, and I didn't know, and I was like, oh, I'm not gonna get to go to this thing. And then he surprised me, and he made like a little diorama of like me at the event having a great time. And I cried. It was really nice.
That's awesome. So this is a way to really just engage in some conversation. You could ask the same question of each person, so that people can all share that same answer, or you could just grab a different card and oh man, okay, yeah, that's a big one. I don't know. Okay, you can ask me that one. That's an easy one.
Wendy, what is your favorite number and why?
My favorite number is 3. I've always loved the number 3. It's just, well, there were 3 daughters in my family, so I'm one of 3 sisters. I'm right in the middle. I just like 3. I like triangles. I don't know. It seems to go together.
Yeah. So things like this, like having some questions, can be nice. And for some of you, you might think, oh, that feels a little funny. But if you're not used to having family meals, and maybe you're like, oh, I'm not really sure how to get these conversations going, this is a really easy way. And I think also for kids, it's fun because they really like picking the question, and they get to ask the grown-ups questions, and we all get, and you also, things come up, like I've never told you that story about that gift I got, but because of the cards, we just talked about it.
Right.
So you find out unexpected things, even about people you're really close with and talk to all the time.
Yeah, it's amazing for kids to hear stories about their parents' childhood or memories that they have. It's a really nice way to connect. So, so what we also want to talk to you about is making sure you're including everyone at the meal table, including the babies. A lot of times families, choose to feed the baby separately, in the high chair, feed the baby, and then put the baby somewhere else, and then the rest of us will sit down and have a meal. So, so Dr. Fernando is going to take the screen now and talk to you about including baby in family mealtime.
Thank you. Wendy, my favorite number is 3 also.
So see, we learned something today about each other.
Yeah, I've known you for so long and did not know that about you. So maybe we should do conversation cards more often. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about another resource that you might enjoy if you have a baby in your home, and that is the Dr. Yum's First Foods Baby Food Adventure. This is a webinar that actually we made available because of the pandemic. Typically, in my office, we have attached to the office a teaching kitchen where Wendy and Sarah are sitting now. And that teaching kitchen is a place where we do a lot of instruction. Because of the pandemic, however, we haven't been able to have in-person classes. And one of the classes that I really miss the most is our baby food class, where we bring families with brand new eaters into the kitchen and show them how they can introduce solid foods. Because of the pandemic, we're not having those in-person classes, but we really felt it was important to keep that information available to families. So we have this webinar that can be accessed at any time. It is about a 50-minute webinar. If you go to the Dr. Yum project's website, which is dryum.org, you will see at the very top our virtual resource page. And it's a button that goes to that page, and then you'll see this baby food webinar, and you can watch it at your leisure and learn a lot about how you can start your adventure of healthy and happy eating from the very first bites that your babies take. So I wanted to just cover like a little snapshot of what we talk about in that webinar. I think, at least in America, we have kind of an idea of what babies should be eating, but we don't often really talk about why we want to introduce certain foods to babies. And we don't really touch on this idea that feeding is one really important facet of a child's overall development. So children are acquiring a huge toolbox of developmental skills, including learning to speak, learning to sit up, learning to walk, using their fingers in ways that help them to eventually learn to write. So fine motor skills. But feeding is actually one facet of that overall development. And so we want to make sure as parents that we're paying a lot of attention to that development and introducing foods that help that development. We also have been learning a lot over the past few decades about what foods are important to introduce and why. One example of that is high allergen foods. So in the past, even when I was a new mother and had brand new babies, in America, we were told as parents to not introduce the common top food allergens until a baby was older. However, research has now shown that early introduction of some of these foods, particularly peanuts and eggs, can actually help reduce the incidence of food allergies. So typically, I encourage families to introduce these top food allergens much earlier than we previously did. So I just included this top food allergen slide for you to know what the top food allergens are, at least in the US. Maybe where you are, they're a little bit different. And so my current advice is for families to introduce these foods early. And if there is a family member who has food allergies, or if a child has a history of eczema or very dry allergic type skin, we actually may introduce these foods even earlier. So there's some evidence that for those children, that early introduction of the top food allergens may be even more protective. So I always encourage families, though, to talk with their pediatrician if you do have concerns about introducing these food allergens. But the research is really more and more encouraging of giving these foods to babies very early. We often forget about iron, but iron is a really, really important nutrient for babies. It's a mineral that they need to expand their blood volume. They need iron for brain development, cognitive development. So we want to make sure, especially in our breastfed babies, because breast milk doesn't have a lot of iron, that we include iron-rich foods. So in our webinar, we talk about what are some of these foods that we want to include in a baby's diet. And some of these foods look like they're a little bit grown up, but we really like for families to introduce these foods in ways that are comfortable for babies, but there's really no limits to what babies can eat. As long as we make the foods developmentally appropriate and safe for a baby to chew and swallow, really babies can be introduced to many types of foods and at a very quick pace, more than we really realized. Babies are hungry. They're growing really, really fast. They are gaining pounds every time that you visit with your pediatrician. You may notice how many pounds a baby gains. It's really astonishing. And so consequently, babies are very hungry and they're very willing to eat many of the foods that we introduce. Now, if you have a baby that doesn't really like a new food, maybe they make a face, maybe the sensation or the taste is very intense and they make an unpleasant face. I always tell parents, don't give up on that food. So if you find a food that a baby doesn't really like and they make that unpleasant face, then you know that's a food that you need to practice by introducing it many more times. So don't give up on foods, even if you get that face. The other thing that we talk about a lot in our baby food class, our in-person class, but also in our webinar, is how easy it is to make foods. Where we are here in the US, there is a whole baby food industry, and you can buy many of these foods. But the truth is that baby food is so easy to make from the foods and the meals that you are making. And that's sort of the point of talking about this today, is we can include our babies, even as the smallest, youngest eaters, in our family meal. And they may not need special baby food. We can be preparing their meals right alongside of the meals that we're making for ourselves. And often we can take that same food and just modify it so it's easy and softer and more safe for a baby to swallow. So I gave some examples of some very, very, very first foods that we might try. As we're making our own foods, we can be steaming some foods for the baby, some of the same foods that we're making in our recipes. And so I included some examples of things that you can steam, some first foods that can actually be prepared and served raw. So avocado, ripe avocado and ripe bananas are great examples. And then foods that can be roasted. And then roasting is really a great way to give some softness and sweetness to foods and make them easy to squish up and serve to babies as first foods. So I would urge you to visit the Dr. Yum website. I'm going to probably be showing you that website, and as we're talking about some of the tools on the website, I'll even show you how you can find some recipes that are family recipes that we can serve our babies to. So I'm going to send this back to Sarah and Wendy.
Okay, so we've talked about why meals are important. We've talked about some things to keep in mind at meals, and now we've talked about how you can include everyone, even your babies, in the family meal together. So the next thing we need to think about is what is actually happening at the table as far as the food goes, because that's still a big part of what's going on, right? We're having conversation and all these things, but we're also eating together. And what we want to share with you is a really nice framework or guide that can help you figure out who should be doing what at the meal. So for parents or adults at the meal, their jobs are to decide what we're going to eat, when we're going to eat, and where we're going to eat. While the child is responsible for how much they eat or whether or not they eat from what has been offered at the meal that we're all sharing together.
This is the brave part.
Yes.
Because a lot of parents, when they hear that, they're like, my child gets to decide how much they eat and whether they even eat at all. I'm not comfortable with that.
Right.
So this is where it really takes some parental bravery to really live into this, because it works.
Right, it works. And so I'll give you some examples and we'll talk about, how this kind of plays out and why it works so well. So as the parent, you're responsible for what, when, and where. So that means the what is what we are eating. So you've planned out the meal. You've offered those 4 different parts, the carbs, protein, fat, and fiber that we talked about earlier.
And you've also hit on maybe an always preferred food,
Right.
A usually preferred food, and some new foods.
So you're giving your kid a mix of things that they tend to usually enjoy, as well as some new things or things that they're still practicing. So they have a few options in there. So that's the what. Then the when is, when are we eating? So you're deciding when breakfast is, when lunch, when dinner, when snacks are. That's that feeding schedule that we talked about earlier. You're also in charge of that. And then you're in charge of the where. So that's, we're all eating at the dinner table, or wherever you usually share your meals. It could be we're eating at a restaurant if you're at a restaurant, but you're deciding where we're eating. So as a grown-up, you're deciding what we're having, when we're having it, and where we're going to be having it. And then you've set up all this structure, so then the child comes in, maybe they've helped you with some of the preparation. Now we're here at mealtime, they get to look at what is available, what you have planned out, and they're gonna sit there and they get to decide if they're gonna eat anything or how much they're gonna eat. But it's always from what you have already decided is available at that meal.
So what happens when I come to the table and I'm like, can I have some yogurt?
No, if yogurt is not part of the meal, we're not having yogurt now. So you might say something like, well, we're not having yogurt at this meal, but we might have it later, but right now we're having what we're having here. So you can, and because you have that feeding schedule, kids know there's going to be other chances to eat.
And maybe at the next snack, yogurt would be an offering.
Or maybe it shows up for breakfast the next day, or maybe it's like a topping or a spread that comes in with a lunch or dinner in a couple days. So you're hearing what they're interested in, but it doesn't mean that they have like free reign of any food that's available and can just pick something else. So that helps them to try the food that's at the meal. And like we said, you want to have some things that they generally prefer, so it's not like all new foods, because that can be really scary if you're really hungry and there's all this stuff you've never had before, and then we can have a total meltdown situation,
right? Which
we want to try to avoid.
But we really, at the Dr. Young Project, our mantra is one meal for one family,
right?
Because we, it's difficult enough to prepare all these wonderful healthy foods for your families, and during pandemic, you're probably preparing way more meals at home than you ever have before. And to have prepared a whole meal and then have a child say to you, I want this instead. And then you scramble to the kitchen and you're trying to make a whole different meal. No, don't do that.
Yeah, it's too much. It's too much.
You're not a short order cook.
Right, and then your child is not getting the opportunity to try these foods. If you always have this kind of like escape route where they can just opt out and get something else.
I can always have a bowl of cereal, or I could always have
or I'll just ask for something else and I'll get it. Then they don't have to be in that sometimes a little bit uncomfortable situation of trying something new or seeing what's offered and exploring it. And then as far as also they get to decide, whether they're going to eat at all, they may not be super hungry. Maybe they had they ate a lot at lunch and now it's snack time and they're just not that hungry. They haven't been running around. Maybe they've been sitting doing schoolwork or reading or something that doesn't use quite as much energy. They may not be hungry, and that's okay. But then, they'll have another eating opportunity later because you're setting up this feeding schedule. So it can be a little scary.
But you can do it. You can be brave. And we're going to have right now, Dr. Fernando is going to put up our website, because what we really want to do, this is our last webinar with you, and we want you to be a part of our project, which means we want you to be visiting dryum.org on a regular basis and using it in your life. So what we have up here is our website, and we're going to show you, of course, you can see the purple bar up at the top where the arrow is. This is all of the resources that we've created for you to use during this time, and everything on here is free. We have videos, we've got cooking classes. You could join in a live cooking class for real from where you are and cook with us. We have our videos, but what we want to make sure that you always visit is our recipe side. Oh, I see the baby food webinars right over there on the side. Let's go ahead and see if we can find Meal-O-Matic and get people really into using that part. So you're gonna go, you can go to our recipes, and that's where all of our recipes live. And you can find any recipe there, searching by any tag. You could search from our baby food tag, and you'll see all of those meals where we show the adaptation of how you can feed that meal to babies.
Yeah, let me just demo that.
Yeah, why don't you just do that? Great.
So all of these recipes are recipes from our catalog, the baby food option. You just click it. And they are recipes where Dr. Fernando has written up a simple modification. Maybe it's to adjust the texture a little bit, or, you know, pulling something out a little bit
How about if you grab the chicken veggie meatballs, since we did highlight those in the last one when we did the lunch, it's back up.
Okay.
Yeah, up and over on the right.
There we go.
Yeah, yeah. And so you can go there, and those were the chicken veggie meatballs that we highlighted in the lunch building last webinar. And if you go all the way down to the bottom of the rest, oh, actually you can click the little baby. That's right. I see it's right there too. So the baby food option is written out right there.
And so then you can see how you can make a recipe that you would make for your whole family and just make a simple modification to make it appropriate so that your baby or new eater can also enjoy the same food with everyone else.
Exactly. Okay, so let's go to Mealtime really quick so we can show you what we would do and what we teach our parents to do. And this is a great thing to do at the end of your week or at the end of your grocery shopping week. It may not be a technical, it might not be Friday, but it might be the end of the week after you're kind of at the end of your groceries. You've made all the different meals that you're making that week, and now you have leftovers. And so how can you turn bits of this and that are in your fridge into a meal? We have 7 recipe frameworks here. The one we're going to highlight today is called Yum Bowl. So it's the very last one. And we'll just go ahead and Nimali, we'll go ahead and tell you what we've got. We've got quinoa.
Okay.
We have chicken. We also have some lentils, but that's fine. We have veggies. We've got broccoli, cauliflower, and Brussels sprouts roasted. We also have some tomatoes that are fresh. Yep, that's on there. For our greens, we have kind of a mix of spinach and kale.
Okay.
And for different sauces, we've got actually some hummus today. We have some salsa. And for toppings, we have a bunch of different choices. We've got some pepitas, we have some cheese, we've got some nuts. Right? Yeah, okay. And so then you click that red bar on the bottom that says ready for the next step. And then these are your instructions for how to build that Yum Bowl with a little video of Dr. Yum explaining the Yum Bowl method. What we do love about Yum Bowl, though, is that we have all of these options. We're going to slide some things so you can see what we've got here. And maybe you had a couple of different carbs that that week. You had some potatoes left over and some quinoa. Maybe you had chicken, plus you also had lentils. You had some roasted veg, but you also have some raw veg. So these are the things that you would just set out and let everyone build their own bowl. Here's our toppers, and we have some hummus and cheese. So we've got all of these different options. And this is how Yum Bowl works. And this is also how that division of responsibility works, is that you provide, you decide what we're eating. We're going to eat Yum Bowl tonight, but then the children can come with their bowl
and go down
and decide how much, which things they're going to eat and how much.
And so, you know, all of the makers on Mealtime, there are different types of meals, and they are all great, and they help you use up your leftovers or things that you might need to use in the fridge. But Yum Bowl is especially nice because it's a really fun experience to get to customize your bowl based on what's available and what you like. And everyone might make a little bit different combinations, and it's good to offer a few different things. You know, we have the leftover cooked vegetables from another night, and those are kind of soft, but then also we have something raw like cucumber, which is crunchy. Same for like the toppers, you might have something like this pickled radish, which is really
Which gives
sour,
a different flavor.
tangy.
Or you just have some pepitas, which gives it a crunch. So it's really our favorite night of the Parenting for Wellness series is when our families come, we do Yum Bowl, and we have to coach the parents, we really do, because they will kind of hover behind their child and say, oh, don't you want to try some roasted broccoli? Or don't you want to put some of this on there? And we kind of encourage them to step back, let the children choose what they're going to put in their bowl and what they're going to try. And the great thing is, they will experiment. They'll try a little bit of this and a little bit of that. If they like that combination, they can go back and get some more, or they could switch it up and try some different things.
And you might be surprised at the different combinations that people make. And then when you have this kind of environment where you as the grown-up aren't worrying about exactly how much or what everyone at the table is eating, you're just providing the meal, and that's kind of where you step back. It allows you to enjoy the meal as well and have it be a more pleasant experience, which is what we talked about at the beginning, how meal times are so important for not just the food, but all of that relationship building and the family time together. And it allows you to do that because you're not worried about every single bite that everyone at the table is taking and kind of doing this mental calculation, especially if you have several children. It's a lot to keep track of, and it doesn't actually help you get where you're trying to go, which is having your child enjoy a lot of food. So just step back, enjoy the meal,
yep.
and have a good time together as a family.
And I'm going to ask you this because this is a question we get a lot. What if my child doesn't eat?
There will be another chance to eat soon. And that's that feeding schedule. It's coming up. It's, you know, it's predictable. It's not like, oh, we're never going to eat again. You know that
and it's okay.
They're gonna have another
it's
chance
okay
to
if they don't eat, or if they just eat a very little bit at one meal or snack, right?
And they might eat a lot at the next meal. But we really want to trust them too to monitor their own hunger and fullness, because they're really in touch with that. And if we try to force kids to eat or stop them from eating before they finish, then we can kind of make it so they're not as attuned to their own feelings because they've got this outside influence saying, eat now, don't eat now. So.
Okay, we are gonna have any questions come in that you can see?
Yeah, I don't see any questions, but if you do, we just have about 3 more minutes left. And you can use the chat button if you have any other questions. So we'll wait for a moment to
I'm gonna move this up a little closer so that we can see everybody better. If there are any questions. Did you have any questions, Dr. Fernando, on what we were talking about? Or any questions that you hear a lot in the pediatrician's room?
Yeah, I mean, I think particularly in toddlers, I hear a lot of parents that are nervous about why their toddler is not eating. And so my go-to advice about toddlers is that toddlers don't care about food. They just don't. They don't really have a big drive to eat because they're not growing very fast. And this can be a very tough transition because as babies, they were very good eaters. They were very hungry. And then when they reach about 2, 1.5 to 2, they just don't really have that drive. Their body doesn't need food. As Sarah said, children are very good at knowing how much food they need. And from about 1 to 4, kids don't really grow very fast each year. And so they don't need a lot of food. So a lot of parents worry. And then because they're worried that their child isn't eating a lot of foods, they start finding foods that they know their child will like.
So like the fruit squeezes and the fruit yogurts, drinkables, and snack foods.
A lot of those foods are easy, so they may not have to chew them a lot. A lot of them are very, very palatable, so they're either very salty or they're very sweet foods. And what happens is children are going to like those foods, whether they're hungry or not. They're very addictive, very enticing foods. So they may start eating when they're not hungry. And then they also start preferring those foods. And parents may be sort of encouraged by the fact that they're eating and start to only serve those foods too.
Yeah.
And so it creates a little bit of a cycle where toddlers then only like a few certain highly palatable foods.
And then they
So-
end up in my preschool with that, you know. So
Right.
so if the toddler habit is built for those snack foods and the sweet and highly palatable and salty, then by the time they come to me at age 3 and 4, then I have kids who are very selective in what they're going to eat at snack time, and they really only want a drinkable yogurt and some goldfish crackers, and that's it.
Right. So it's back to the division of responsibility. Even for a toddler, you decide what and where and how much, and well, how much is actually the child. You lay that out there and decide what it is and what the mealtime is and where, and then the child will decide if they're hungry. And if they're not hungry, then you put it away and bring it out for the next scheduled meal or snack. And then the child again can decide by that time, maybe they're hungry and they're willing to eat that more nutritious mealtime option. So be brave. And we hope you've enjoyed this series. We hope you've enjoyed today's topic. And thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll continue to use the resources on the Dr. Yum website. Share them with your friends, share them with family members. Everything on our website is free, and we're really eager to share this information with parents across the globe.
Yeah, and you can send us questions or anything on our social media channels, or even to our info email. We want to stay connected to you. Mm-hmm. So we're very happy to have built this relationship, and we would love to stay connected with you. So please be a part of our Yum Nation, is what we call it. But yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.